Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Helen Fernandez, who's an associate professor of geriatrics and palliative medicine. She's also the geriatrics program director and an active member in the IME. And we asked her to speak because we wanted to, just as in the last 3 or 4 months, the Institute for Medical Education, which is really the home for clinician educators within the institution, just went through a call for proposals for people that are interested in becoming advanced members in the academy. And we thought this was a nice time for us to talk about the role of promotions and the promotions and tenure process for clinician educators. So please welcome Dr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw and Dr. Lightman, for inviting me, and Sophie for her support as well. And I look forward to talking to you about this topic. I speak on a role as a clinician educator at Mount Sinai for 14 years. So I've gone through this process several times and just almost finished putting all my paperwork for professorship. So this is hot off the press, since I'm really acutely feeling it, and as well as a master educator in the Institute of Medical Education and reviewer of those applications. So I'm speaking per that expertise. So what I was asked to speak about was kind of the broad definition of faculty scholarship and faculty promotion. And one of the things just to remember is a place that you have to go to, if you haven't gone to, is the faculty handbook, which I will highlight multiple times. Because part of this whole process is knowing the rules and the policies. If you don't know the rules and you don't follow the policies, then it's not going to happen. The second thing is that you are your best promoter. No one, I don't know anybody, who can really put your CV together except you. You know what you've done. And I think one of the biggest things is that we often are our worst enemies because everything else comes before ourselves, right? We can think about, oh, I need to finish those notes, so I need to go teaching, I need to run here and there, and we forget that we should really be working on putting all of our work together. So by the end of this, I hope that we kind of review why it's important to work on your CV, talk about what the promotion guidelines here are at Mount Sinai and its process, and speak about certain components of the CV that I think, one of the things I've learned is kind of, when originally I was putting a CV together, that Sinai has really progressed compared to some institutions in terms of valuing the work of clinician educators. And therefore, there's specific areas where you can really highlight that value. And then describe briefly some educational opportunities here. So why does sometimes, where do we go wrong with faculty and career planning? Sometimes we don't have honest assessment in our training and our interests. Sometimes we lack focus. It might seem like we're all over the map doing everything, especially at the beginning, because you're trying to take a lot of opportunities. But then with time, we want to develop kind of an area of focus in the area of niche. Sometimes we're emphasizing quantity over quality. And I'll talk about that because now with the new format of the CV, there's really a highlight of trying to put the quality measures within the teaching that we're doing. Sometimes we're not using our mentors correctly or using just one mentor, and we should use more. And then sometimes we don't plan beyond our 3 years. And then sometimes we're not taking opportunities to be more visible outside the institution. Where do departments go wrong? So that was kind of our part, faculty, but sometimes what goes wrong on the department level? Well, there might be a misalignment between what your department needs and what you need. Maybe you don't have attentive mentorship. And then sometimes there might be a conflict of service, right? Certain things need to be done, and there might not be enough protected time to do other things that are going to help in your development. There might not be sufficient time to invest or attention to research or its infrastructure, or even assembling the supporting documentations. It's amazing to me that it's really spelled out there, but that in the faculty handbook, but you have to really take a look at it and go through the documents to really understand what the process is. And I think one of the one of the keys is really looking at your colleagues that are ahead of you, that have gone through the process, because they can really, really mentor you through the process of promotion. So how can really putting your CV together, your portfolio, help you? Well, if you're seeking a promotion, obviously, you're seeking a new job, right? So there might be a new position that's available within the system, within your department. This is a great opportunity to update your CV because they often ask you for that. It's part of your annual review, right? So each department division has a meeting with their faculty. Bring your CV, even if it's not asked for. Bring it, send it ahead of time, saying, you know, the department chair or the division chair may or may not read it, true, but at least you've sent it ahead of time that you are prepared to look at it. And that's a great opportunity to say, look, this is what I've done, right? This is the inventory of things I've done so far. Where am I? Am I ready for the next step, for promotion? What do I need to get promoted to the next step? It's a great opportunity for maybe getting more protected time also, obviously in submitting your grant proposals and assembling your bio sketch as well. Also for teaching nominations, so there's several opportunities here, right? They're teaching awards, they're given out department, but they're also institutional level, also kind of in the IME, Institute of Medical Education. So having a CV ready, if somebody wants to nominate you, you know, instead of, okay, I don't really have it together yet, can I, you know, give me a week or so, maybe I'll get it together, and then you're trying to catch up. But it also helps you with mentor meetings, right? Because then, in terms of trying to goal setting, of what am I missing? What is it that I need to get me to the next step? So like I said, know your local politics, so know Sinai's, you know, take advantage of these faculty development sessions. So GME offers them, IME offers them as well, within your division, within your department. Really, as I said, take advantage of those annual reviews, ask your colleagues. You know, you went through this process, you were just promoted as an associate professor. Can I just sit down and pick your brain? What did you do? You know, you might, you know, if they're often want to help you out because they may or may not have had help themselves. They're maybe willing to share their CV with you, sit down and talk to you how they crafted certain things, especially, which I'll talk a little bit about, the chairman's letter. Because often you're going to be asked to write that letter. The chairman will reflect and annotate and correct and edit, but like any letter of recommendation for either a teaching award or for promotions, they're going to ask you to take a first stab at it, right? So it's good to get some examples out there. This is a table that describes the activities of a clinician educator. I'll go through the description that Sinai has, but just to see what the national kind of descriptors of clinician educators. So sometimes people talk about little c, big E, big C, little e, and that really pertains to what amount of time is being spent kind of with clinical activities as opposed to educational activities. And you can see here, you know, where do I fit? You know, am I spending a lot more time on the clinical side, kind of that big C, you know, 70 to 90%, where I'm spending much more time on actually teaching students and residents as I'm doing my clinical work, or am I spending much more time on administrative, on developing curriculum, and maybe more on the big E, little c? Sinai doesn't differentiate that, for example, but I just wanted to, that might exist in other institutions you have been or going to or have heard about. So Sinai, the track that I'm specifically speaking about is a clinician educator track, because that's what I was asked to speak about, and that's what I know. So it's called clinician and/or clinician educator. And how it's defined here is for faculty who spend a significant part of their professional activities in clinical practice and/or education, and whose scholarship is focused in those areas. And then they have certain categories after that. And this is available, as I said, online, and they have a table when then they specify what would be, and they compare all the tracks. Investigators, voluntary, and this one is specific clinician educator. So for scholarship, successful dissemination of scholarly information, and we'll go through that a little bit, many forms are acceptable. Research, it's not a requirement, it's encouraged. Clinical care, they're looking for excellence in clinical practice with growing reputation of clinical expertise over time. Teaching, integrating excellent teaching into clinical practice or central part of duties if a scientist, and service, increasing service and leadership over time. So this is the website that you can go directly to that will take you through all these different tables and will take you through examples of chair letters, examples of, I'll give you an example of CV. It will give you the Word document where you can cut and paste your CV instead of trying to create those tables on your own, which sometimes could be really hard. So it's a really great resource. It's really spelled out there. Often in departments, there's somebody who is doing the processing of this information. That is assisting the chair to put this information together, and they could be very helpful as well. On that website, you have the tenure guidelines as well. You also get requirements for full-time, part-time, voluntary faculty. So we're going to go through specific areas around the CV that I think highlight our value as an educator. I think what's really important, and they say right at the top of the document, don't leave blanks. So there might be areas that don't pertain to you, like clinical trials. Still have the table there. You can put non-applicable, but don't leave it blank. Don't omit it. They want you to still have the category, because it's almost a checklist what they're doing in terms of what they're following. And list information in chronological order. I would advise have several people look at this, right? So you don't want to go into this and then you have like this obvious grammatical error, right? This is you. This is a picture of who you are. So it just shows that if you don't put kind of work into reviewing your CV and correcting your CV, then perhaps this is not as important to you. So I'm not going to go through, because it's a pretty standard kind of format, but just so that you know what the format is. So your name and contact, your appointments, any gaps of employment, and then education. And within education, because they changed this, you would include your residency training and any fellowship training, certification, licensure, and then honors. If you've had several honors and can split them internally and externally, you can do that as well with teaching awards. So let's say you had a local teaching award from the IME and your department, and then you got a teaching award from your organization. What you want to do, you would say, okay, the reviewer should know that. They're looking at it, they'll see that one is given by my national and one was given by my regional. You don't want them to work, right? You want them to say, okay, the requirements to be a professor as a clinician educator is that she has to have a national as well as local and regional reach. Well, I'm spelling it out. I'm splitting it up into internal and external. So they're not doing the work. I'm doing the work for them. If it's one award, you're not going to split it into that, but if you do have different categories of internal, external awards, split them up. And then it goes through patents. And then the other kind of interesting area which you can highlight is professional appointment roles. And let's say you're elected to certain positions of professional societies, or you're appointed to memberships of editorial boards. This is, and this is not per se as an occasional reviewer for manuscript. This is that you've served a role on the board. And then also the committees, both internal and external. And this I would, if you are doing something internally with curriculum review for the medical school, and then externally you're on your subspecialty society developing their milestones, right? You would highlight that and break it apart again, right? Because you're trying to show that your impact is reaching not only locally, kind of on the system level, but that you are reaching out on a national level as well. And then they've introduced some new kind of categories in the CV format. So there's a section now where you can describe kind of your profile with 200 and 250 words or less, what maybe your research profile. So if you have a certain area of expertise that you're working on, this might not pertain as much for clinician educators, but let's say there's a curriculum that you developed and you measure the impact, and then this now has been taken as a curriculum in other medical schools, and there's a study related to it, it might fit into it. What might really fit more for a clinician educator is a clinical profile, as well as what the impact you've had, right? So I kind of reflecting back when I was putting my CV together, I thought, I've been program director for over 10 years. I've trained over 150 trainees in my program, and they have populated across the country in many different areas, and we're one of the biggest programs. We are the biggest program in the country. So, that's huge. So putting that together in words, because even though I have a category that says geriatric fellowship director, they don't know, the reviewers don't know what that means, right? I need to spell it out to them what that means, okay? And then then you go through grants. Included now here are foundation support, which wasn't there before. And then you want to past, current, and pending grants as well. And then clinical trials participation, like I said, which might be less important for us. So what I'm going to kind of go into now is more the other educational activities, like teaching activities, trainee records, that again show our quality. So one of the biggest problems that we're noticing in the early part of the 2000s is that there wasn't really a systematic way of recognizing clinician educators. There were not reliable measures, there were not valid methods, and there was a big push through the AAMC to try to quantify this. And so there's been work, and Sinai has adapted a lot of that work. And so this is really documenting our quality and our quantity as well as the impact. And so I feel that the CV can really highlight that. So I mentioned the impact, but now we're going to go into the training and teaching activities that I think would be another place to kind of showcase our value. And then the other are educational materials we develop and publish, right, as well as presentations. So this is a table on the CV for trainees. So it's pretty self-explanatory. You have the name of the trainee, the level of who the trainee is this a graduate student, is this a medical student, what the role that you had in this trainee's life, and then what inclusive dates that you were participating in this trainee's development, what was the kind of the training venue, and then currently what your trainee is doing. And so, I caution you here because sometimes as program directors, people have a tendency of listing everybody, and not that you're not impactful with a lot of people, you are, but I would be selective, because one of the things when reviewing these CVs, they'll say, well, it's showing me like 200 people here. Was he really this, involved in this of 200 trainees' lives? Or are there select trainees that they may call upon to showcase your value as a mentor? So as a program director, clerkship director, think about who might be the trainees that you had the most contact and the biggest role in terms of mentorship, and not listing everybody that you've ever trained. Teaching activities, again, there's a nice table here, and the new addition is evaluation summary. So some examples I've put here, for example, journal club, what level are you doing the journal club? Is this a department level activity or a school level activity? What was your role? Are you leading that? How many trainees? and how often are you doing this? And then is there an evaluation summary? And I want to talk about the evaluation summary. So many times, right, so there might be a journal club that you might be one of the faculty that sits in the journal club, helps facilitate it, maybe mentors the trainee in selecting the journal club, but there might not be a specific evaluation for your role as a facilitator and a mentor, right? Or there might be. So for activities, it's okay to say not applicable if there isn't. But if there is something that you're doing on a consistent basis, and the idea is that you're going to put teaching activities that you're doing more than once, right? These are teaching activities that you're doing across time and consistently, is ask for evaluations. So let's say, I give a lecture in the Art and Science of Medicine year 2, and I've given a lecture in different formats for the last 8 or 9 years. So I would expect and hope that, I know they have the evaluations for that talk, but if they haven't given it to me, then I'm going to ask for it. There might be not school-specific or residency-specific, so if there isn't an evaluation tool, ask them, 1, you want it if they do have it, but 2, if they don't have it, then it's okay to bring one yourself, right? Because how else is a review committee on promotions gonna know how well you do this unless you have an evaluation summary, right? So sometimes you have to bring your own if they don't have it themselves. So you can make a quick evaluation tool and you can put it there. But we can get evaluations from residency, right, as an inpatient teaching attending, through New Innovations as a platform. You can get evaluations through eValue for the medical school. So there are many places, and sometimes we don't remember to ask for them. Sometimes you're sent those evaluations anyway, but sometimes you have to ask for them. So just remember. So what are some different teaching activities that you can put within that table? So think about your role as an inpatient preceptor, as an outpatient preceptor, right? You probably spend a good amount of time doing these activities. And so give me that feedback. Put that in the table. You're doing teaching rounds, right? Maybe you're doing small group activities like clinical reasoning or physical exam, case discussions. Like I said, journal club, lectures. Maybe you're doing faculty development, or you're conducting a leadership series, or you're doing in-service on procedures. All these count as teaching activities. So this is thinking about it at the broadest sense of the word. There is again, I would highlight, if you're doing some internal and you also have some external kind of consistent teaching activities that you're doing, you would separate that out in 2 different tables. Because again, you don't want the reviewers to have to work if they're ticking off whether or not I have a national presence. Then you go through an administrative leadership appointment. So you think about internally, you might be a fellowship director, a clerkship director. This would go into this area. There might be external leadership appointments that you have as well. And you can put a brief descriptor of what you do for that administrative role. And how often you meet, and what's the percent time effort that you're doing that leadership role. I would include that in this section of CV. It used to be that we get this huge portfolio that was this humongous, that no one looked at, but that I remember when I was going up for an associate professor, I'd spent like weeks putting together copies of all my CV, all my talks, of all my slides, of CDs that I had produced. They don't look at it. Now they're really looking at your CV as your repository and your chair's letter and your reviewer's letter. Those are the things that they're now looking at for promotions. So the other part is publications. So there's a peer-reviewed original contributions, and I'll talk to you about levels and the clinician educator and how many you need. What's important here, if let's say you're moving from associate to, or assistant to associate, is that you want to asterisk or bold the new ones so that they're, since your last promotion. So even though they should be able to tell that again because of what you put at the beginning when you were promoted, you don't want them to have to do any work. So let's say I was promoted in 2007 and I had 5 publications, right? Then I would highlight the ones that are more recent so they can see what I've done in the span of these, 8 years that I've been an associate professor. So you have peer review, other peer-reviewed publications. So the first is really original contributions. The second might be more review articles that you're talking about. If you're invited to do a contribution, an opinion piece, that would be in the invited contributions. There are books and book chapters, and then non-peer review publications. Think about, let's say there's a published curriculum you've done. I'll talk more about this, but let's say you've published a curriculum on online portals. For example, I think we need to utilize more, and this is now valued, MedEd portal as an opportunity. It's peer-reviewed. It's put out through AAMC. You can cite it on your CV, and it shows an impact of what your curriculum, not only locally, but that it can be utilized on a national level. So go to mededportal.org. Think about submitting your curriculum. There's a couple of things that you would have to put together, a faculty development guide for it. They'll have reviewers kind of give you comments, and they want to make sure that you have an evaluation piece to your curriculum when you're putting it up for possible publication. So what are the publication requirements by rank? So for professor, tenure, clinical professor, associate professor being considered for tenure, you need 5 publications. For associate professor, you need 3 publications. Then after you've gone through the publications, then you can list invited lectures, presentations, poster presentations, other kind of media educational materials would be listed. All of these are chronological. What's important, let's say they've talked about what's kind of valued in terms of the publications that are high value. So first, second, and last author are considered kind of the ones that would be considered for promotion. But let's say you're in the middle. You can actually put in a comment in your publication that even though you were kind of in the middle author, you contributed, and you can designate in the development of the research, of the actual review, of the evaluation. You can actually specify, even though it might be in the middle, that you're an author in the middle, you can be very specific of how you contributed to this publication. So I would use that, because sometimes it may be that you're not first, second, or last. It might have been done chronologically, who knows. But you can specify how you were involved in this project. So just to kind of show you what the actual outlines are, there's tables, again, in the physician handbook, where the title is assistant professor, and then they tell you what the criteria, and then some extra remarks. The other parts of the table are kind of appointment, and then tenure, which I didn't include here. But a criteria for an assistant professor, a commitment to excellence in clinical practice and or education with ability to integrate teaching and scholarship. And the chair can at any moment recommend, there isn't a certain amount of time that you have to have in that position to be recommended as an associate professor. For associate professor, you have to have local, regional recognition. You have to have significant achievement in clinical care, teaching scholarship at Mount Sinai. And you can be, again, recommended at any point to full professor. If there's special requirements about asking for tenure, then there is another process of review for that. The other thing to know is what are the requirements in terms of outside reviewers, letter writers for you that support you. So for associate professor, it's 10 letters. So 10 letters of people that have not worked at Mount Sinai ever. So current, past faculty. So that's big, just so that you know that. It can't be somebody who's your direct mentor, and there can't be more than 3 letters from one institution, okay? And it has to be at the level, the person has to have the same rank as you or higher, right? So you're not gonna, if you're going for associate, you're not gonna ask an assistant professor to be your letter writer. For full professor, you need 20 letters with the same caveats, that they can't be former faculty or current faculty. You know, sometimes this is really hard to do if you're in a small field, right? I think about in my field where a lot of people came from here. So that's why it's great to network, which I'll talk about at the end, but at your national meetings, at the, you know, signing up for senior meetings with a mentor, that's a great opportunity because they may be potential letter writers for you in the future. I'm not, you know, you have to think about it that way. Somebody comes here for a visiting professorship, that's a great opportunity to get to meet them, have lunch with them, have coffee with them. So they get to know who you are, and they could be a potential letter writer. Now, you know, I've had different recommendations about the letter writers. Some people say, reach out to them and write them a quick email and saying, you know, I'm putting my portfolio together, and I know you're very busy, and you have a lot to do, and I really need a strong letter for you. I can understand if you can't write a letter for me. So that gives them a way out. If they can't write you a strong letter, like Dan was talking about, and they can't strongly recommend you, other people don't advocate to reach out to the letter writers. There isn't a policy per se here. People, your mentors might, you know, suggest one way or the other. But, you know, it might be helpful to know that you're not putting somebody on the list that, one, may never write the letter because they just never write letters, or two, can't write you a strong letter because they don't really know you. So that might be a way to see, you know, whether or not they're able to write you a letter. Because this is the holdup usually, is the letter writers, is getting enough people to write letters of support for you. And it's the promotions committee that asks for those letters. You're not asking for those letters. You are submitting a list for those letters, and then they contact people. So professor, you have regional and national recognition, outstanding performance, you have scholarship within the area, you have significant leadership role within the institution or beyond. And then, you know, as I said here, there is a capacity for tenureship, and that would be kind of you have to demonstrate an outstanding level of achievement. I want to highlight here, it's national recognition on clinician educator track. For investigators, we're talking about international recognition. So for clinician educators, it's national. Just general tips, I would say, and I said this from the very beginning, it's selling yourself. You know, it's really summarizing who you are. You want to emphasize your strengths. Pay attention to the font, right? So don't have all these different types of fonts, because that could be very distracting to somebody who's looking at it. You want to make sure it's readable, right? You want to have some sort of footer, right, where there are pages and your name on it. So let's say they printed and a couple of pages are missing, and that's a critical, you know, all your training tables are disappeared. This way, when they're looking at the page numbers, they see what they're sequentially following. And have other people look at it. The other thing I wanted to talk about, besides kind of the CV and understanding the policies and procedures of promotion, is thinking about the Institute of Medical Education here, and thinking about applying for, there's basic membership and there's also advanced and master level membership. Their requirements are a little bit similar to your for promotions, and sometimes as you're doing that work, it might make sense to try to do both at the same time, right? Because you're putting so much work on putting your CV together for promotion, why not, you know, also put in for the Institute? It's a little bit different because in the Institute, which I'll show you, there are different categories. It's the same idea of trying to put your quality and of work together, but they actually have worksheets. I usually run another faculty development on applying for the IME because I go through it with some detail. But just so you get a general idea of what the application is like, there's an introductory section. You put forward your educational philosophy and then your 5-year goal as an educator. And then they have 5 domains: teaching, innovation, mentorship, educational leadership and administration, and education research and scholarship. And the idea is that you're not excellent in all of these categories, right? For a fellow, you have to be excellent in 1. For a master educator, you want to have 2. So, 2+, essentially. So it's not that you're going to, you don't have to have excellence in every single one of these categories. They also have really great directions and examples online on the IME website of how these worksheets, and they have these worksheets both as a Word document that you can fill out. And it's the same general ideas that you would do for your teaching activities on your CV, where you're highlighting what in specific, for example, you're doing for curriculum design. Let's say I innovated a new curriculum on clinical reasoning, right? I would describe that curriculum, who I'm teaching, who are my learners, how long I've taught this, and then I have an evaluation process, and I demonstrate what the summative evaluation, and then examples of comments from that evaluation. And so really you pick kind of, 1, 2, sometimes 3 of these categories where you can highlight the impact that you have as an educator. So I really kind of recommend, thinking about this as you're thinking about your promotion, of taking advantage. I think also this is viewed highly as you're thinking about promotion, of being part of this institute as yet another honor, because it is an honor, because it is peer reviewed. Your application is peer reviewed with 3 peers that review. You have 1 primary and 2 secondary reviewers for membership of fellow or master educator. So it's worth considering and thinking about. And they have a lot of resources. So they also kind of have other components they'll ask you about, which is very similar to the CV, about your publications, the workshops you've done, if they're book chapters or any educational products. They'll ask you about educational grants, and then any professional development or reflective practice that you've done. So really kind of the take-home message here is spend time on you. I know that kind of sounds a little cheesy, but the only way you get promoted is really through you. My husband always says it's like, leaving something at the table. It doesn't make sense to him. We all are busy in many other things, is taking the time, and however it is, to keep a catalog of talks you're doing, lectures, presentations, whether it be you update this on a monthly basis, whether it be some format, some way that you're keeping track, and then keep your long CV where you're keeping track of everything. And then keeping those evaluations. Talk to people who have gone through this process recently, because they're the biggest experts, because they've gone through really the hardship of putting it together. I think there are opportunities, and we've talked about kind of collaborations to bring workshops. Somebody asked me and another colleague who is a fellow educator in IME to come to their department and do faculty development on the IME application, just to help people through the process. And I think that was helpful hopefully for those faculty members, because sometimes it can seem like really, really harder than it should be. And it's just understanding and looking at the tables and just following the rules. Network. I mean, we have a huge system here. This is a great opportunity, shared resources, and thinking about putting collaborative workshops together, right? On many different things. Investigate what teaching activities are happening. Pay attention to those blast emails, because there's some kind of really interesting things. Like, for example, Tomorrow there's workshops along the whole month of May on medical education that are drop-in workshops in May that are happening on campus, led by the IME. Great opportunity. Maybe you've been struggling trying to evaluate curriculum. That might take you to the next step to be able to publish it. And ask for your evaluations. If they don't have them, make your own. E-value and new innovations, they're searchable. They usually give them to faculty on a yearly basis, but sometimes people forget. As a busy program director, I know that sometimes happens, so I always have to have it on my docket kind of by May or June. Let's make sure that we've gotten these out. But if they haven't given it to you, please make sure to ask for them. And I think that's it. And I know this is really kind of cookbook way, but I try to dissect as much of that handbook for you so that you can use it to hopefully take the next step for promotion. So if we have any questions, I'll take them. Yes.
All right, sorry, I kind of have a couple of questions. So
Sure.
when you talk about networking to get outside letters of recommendation for promotion, now if you work like say in a national organization and you do some committee work with them and they know you and they know your name, certainly, how can they speak though about, they've never worked at my hospital, can they speak about my clinical expertise and the kind of healthcare I deliver outside it? They know, yes, I work for this organization, I help further their process, but how can, I'm just wondering, what kind of information can you get for them from, twice a year kind of work?
Right, so, I mean, they're not looking for those letter writers, they're not exactly looking for your excellence on taking care of a patient per se, but they're looking on kind of your national impact as an expert in your field. Maybe they've heard you talk, how you've worked within the committee. Maybe you've brainstormed different things that they can highlight, and that's what they would speak about. So I would say kind of, one of my letter writers I remember said, for a couple of years I was doing this literature review for our national meeting. So it's one presentation for an hour and a half once a year. I did it for like 5 years, right? And it's thousands of people, but I'm like, whenever you're attending a talk. And that person would speak about that in my letter. I mean, I never saw the letter, but that's kind of what that person then was able to speak. That this is a person that's invited on an annual basis because of her expertise in one, being able to review the literature and then apply it within this population. And she provides a great service because we don't want to do it. And we love that somebody else is doing it for us. Another example is we had a visiting professor, like I was chief fellow, so it was years before I would even going for kind of associate, and I was kind of the hostess with the mostest. So I picked her up at the hotel. I went to lunch. I went to dinner. I brought her to journal club. I picked the journal club. I did all these other activities, right? And she's this national figure in a major area in my discipline. And through that relationship and knowing each other, we just kind of keep track. I mean, I just email her once or twice a year, but she could speak about the fact, even from then, of a leadership potential, right? And that she followed my career over time. I didn't think it was that big a deal, but my chair's like, you actually spent a good amount of time with her. You should really think about putting her on the list. I hadn't put her on the list.
Second, about lectures and teaching activities. Now, obviously things like grand rounds and national conferences, of course, goes on your CV, but as a program director, as someone on junior faculty is on your schedule twice a month to give a formalized lecture to the fellows, or even the ones I give to the residents, formal lectures. Isn't that CV worthy? And I would guess that it is. Not talking 5 minutes about tetralogy of flow over the patient's bedside, but a formalized lecture. I think that's CV worthy.
Yes, it is CV worthy. And I would say, if you can take that lecture And now you've converted it into something like, let's say, a workshop, and you've presented it nationally, right? Collaborated with others, and that even shows you moving beyond, you know what I mean? Like, so you've taken that lecture that you initially did as a junior faculty, as a required part of the curriculum, and moved it out.
And then second, just on that, so right now we have no system in place for evaluations of those lectures. So until such a process is in place, kind of I should have my own evaluations.
So,
what do you think of?
Well, one is I think it's a great opportunity, like, so the program director is not evaluating that lecture?
I don't know. I don't send out evaluations, and at least to my knowledge, I don't get feedback on what my VSD talk is or my arrhythmia talk is.
So one thing is to bring that up. That'd be a great opportunity, because they want, I mean, as a program director, you should be getting program evaluations, like, what's the impact of your curriculum? Do we have to, have new topics? And second, but let's say they're not moving and they're not going to do it right now, is that it's okay to bring your own evaluation to that, because you need something, right, to really measure the impact of what this lecture is, right? And it could be simple 4 questions that you're asking, right? And enhancing knowledge, is it changing practice? What, new things they learned. And I know it's kind of, but I feel that if you, we wind up doing a lot of these activities that are not measured, and you can only put NA for so many of them, right? How else are you going to show value? So it's okay to put your own evaluation. They haven't, said like it had to be a certain evaluation. Yes, there's eValue, new innovations as a preceptor and all of that, but these lectures sometimes are not, and I would kind of say, bring one simple, maybe 4 questions or something like that.
Right.
And it's interesting because in other institutions, this just happened with one of my fellows, where the fellow was asked for evaluations on teaching coming in as a new faculty member. To even just come into the institution, right? And so then I haven't heard of that yet. And so then now that's pushing me, like, I get comments about their teaching, but I don't per se, and I watch them teach, but now we have to be, and so we were really mindful for the last 6 months of her fellowship, is one, giving her all the teaching opportunities as much as possible, building her portfolio, and we designed just a quick evaluation for every activity. So she can prove to this new institution that she already comes in as a prepared teacher.
Yes. Writing letters of recommendation. This one was about like how to get like academic promotions within Mount Sinai.
I think he's just giving a summary.
Sorry. Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was curious about your teaching activities, and you were saying specify the number of students. So if you're doing inpatient teaching, I mean, it's like dozens. So how would you, go back 10 years to try and figure out how many?
So what they want is kind of by a yearly, and I would say, so you would total it for the year, let's say. Let's say you're on service, like I put an example of 3 months out of the year. So 3 months out of the year, I have like 10 residents, 4 students, and then you have the amount of time you've done it over, and they can do them. They're not asking you for the total number at the end. They'll see how long you've done it for. But they want to know that how much in those months that you're touching within a year. Ava.
I think it is really helpful to have people do the CV now, keep it running on your computer so you can update it all the time.
Yeah.
It also helps you see where you have a big gap.
Yeah.
So, I'm just now trying to go up for a promotion at a very much lower level, and it's interesting how it'll sort of be like you and another person together would make it to professor, but separately you don't. So it really helps you figure out what it is that you're missing and try to get that done. The second thing, the institution does look at the IME, so that's considered something you can put in your honor category.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, for example, the PEDS department considers that an indication that you've been vetted, so they look at that kindly. So that was one of the things, you can get that, your own institution looks at it better for promotion.
Thank you.
Again, we'll make all this material available to everybody, and we have evaluations you guys can please fill out. That would be really helpful. They're in the lobby out there. And at the other sites, we'll make sure that you guys have the evaluations as well.
Thank you.